Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar, and I'm here to answer your questions about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, everything from The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings to the Silmarillion and all of his other works, and any questions you may have. And if you have a question for me, well, you can certainly leave me a comment, but if you want to answer it in a video, the best way to do it is through Quora, which is a fantastic website where you can ask questions and have any number of people answer them. And there's a link to my Quora account in the description. Very easy to make an account there, and if you probably already have one. If you have like Facebook or Google, that very easy to sign up through them, like basically 2 clicks. Anyway, one thing I want to address before we get started here: last week's video did not have any music, and that was an error on my part. The software that I used to stream and to record videos, there was an update and it wasn't quite catching the audio, but I can see the waveform moving. I can see that the music is being picked up. But anyway, guys, let's start with a reading as we like to start. And today I'm going to be reading to you from Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth, and specifically from the story The Quest of Erebor, which is interesting. To set this up, The Quest of Erebor is a story that takes place a little bit after The Lord of the Rings. During the end of The Lord of the Rings, when everybody's still in Gondor, and Frodo finally gets to sit down with Bilbo, and I believe Legolas and Gimli are also there, and ask all sorts of questions about Gandalf's relation with Bilbo, and how he came to choose Bilbo for the quest that was the main narrative of The Hobbit. And of course, there's lots of flashback and talking about Gandalf's travels and Thorin, and sort of behind the scenes, a little bit of The Hobbit from Gandalf's perspective. So the scene I'm going to read you is... let's see if I can... Did I accidentally... I feel like I was on the wrong page there. Let's see. Oh, here we are. This is where I want it to be. So, I'm going to read you a part where Bilbo has gone to bed. This is right after an unexpected party. Bilbo has gone to bed, and this is Gandalf and Thorin speaking to each other. Fortunately, I did not make any mistake in my use of them. I kept them up my sleeve, as you say in the Shire, until things looked quite hopeless. As soon as Thorin saw them, he really made up his mind to follow my plan, as far as a secret expedition went at any rate. Whatever he thought of Bilbo, he would have set out himself. The existence of a secret door, only discoverable by dwarves, made it seem at last possible to find something of the dragon's doings, perhaps even to recover some gold or some heirloom to ease his heart's longings. But that was not enough for me. I knew in my heart that Bilbo must go with him, or the whole quest would be a failure, or, as I should say now, the far more important events, by the way, would not come to pass. So I had still to persuade Thorin to take him. There were many difficulties on the road afterwards, but for me, this was the most difficult part of the whole affair. Though I argued with him far into the night after Bilbo had retired, it was not finally settled until early the next morning. Thorin was contemptuous and suspicious. "He is soft," he snorted. "Soft as the mud of this Shire, and silly. His mother died too soon. You are playing some crooked game of your own, Master Gandalf. I am sure that you have other purposes than helping me." "You are quite right," I said. "If I had no other purposes, I should not be helping you at all. Great as your affairs may seem to you, they are only a small strand in the great web. I am concerned with many strands, but that should make my advice more weighty, not less." I spoke at last with great heat. "Listen to me, Thorin Oakenshield," I said. "If this hobbit goes with you, you will succeed. If not, you will fail. A foresight is on me, and I am warning you." "I know your fame," Thorin answered. "I hope it is merited. But this foolish business of your hobbit makes me wonder whether it is foresight that is on you, and you are not crazed rather than foreseeing. So many cares have disordered your wits." "They have certainly been enough to do so," I said. "And among them I find most exasperating a proud dwarf who seeks advice from me without claim on me that I know of." and then rewards me with insolence. Go your own ways, Thorin Oakenshield, if you will. But if you flout my advice, you will walk into disaster, and you will get neither counsel nor aid from me again until the shadow falls on you. And curb your pride and your greed, or you will fall at the end of whatever path you take, though your hands be full of gold." He blenched a little at that, but his eyes smoldered. "Do not threaten me," he said. "I will use my own judgment in this matter, as in all that concerns me." "Do so, then," I said. "I can say no more, unless it is this. I do not give my love or trust lightly, Thorin, but I am fond of this hobbit, and wish him well. Treat him well, and you shall have my friendship to the end of your days." I said that without hope of persuading him, but I could have said nothing better. Dwarves understand devotion to friends and gratitude to those who help them. "Very well," Thorin said, at last, after a silence. "He shall set out with my company, if he dares, which I doubt. But if you insist on burdening me with him, you must come too, and look after your darling." "Good," I answered. "I will come and stay with you as long as I can, at least until you have discovered his worth." It proved well in the end, but at the time I was troubled, for I had the urgent matter of the White Council on my hands. So it was that the Quest of Erebor set out. I do not suppose that when it started, Thorin had any real hope of destroying Smaug. There was no hope, yet it happened, but alas, Thorin did not live to enjoy his triumph or his treasure. Pride and greed overcame him in spite of my mourning. Okay, so there you go. I could continue, but it's already enough, don't you think? That's quite a bit. Okay. So let's get to your questions. We have 16 questions to get through today. Starting with this one, I like this one a lot. This is a good one. This came in anonymously. When the Witch King says no man can kill him, is he talking about the entire gender or just the race of men? So this comes up quite a bit. And I have to believe that even the Witch King, when he said these words, he was not so sure himself, or he thought he was so sure. But he found himself doubting in that moment. No man can hinder me. It was an example of a Shakespearean prophecy misinterpreted to fatal results. This is mixed in with just plain old hubris. Let's look at the exact wording. This is what the Witch King said. "Hinder me, thou fool, no living man may hinder me." Now, he does not say men, he says living man, and it sort of comes off like he's saying mortals, living men. Now, where does he get this idea? The original prophecy was given by Glorfindel. Iarnur now rode back, but Glorfindel, looking into the gathering dark, said, "Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." These words many remembered, but Iarnur was angry, desiring only to be avenged for his disgrace. Glorfindel correctly says that the Witch King will not return to Angmar and that his doom is far off. And we find that that is true. It's far off both in terms of location. Gondor is very far from Angmar, and in terms of time, although maybe Glorfindel wouldn't think of that as a very long time. He says it's not by the hand of man. Now, he does not say a man, he says man. So I do not interpret this as gender. I do interpret it as the race of men. Now, Éowyn is of the race of men, but here's what she said. But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Éowyn am I. Éowyn's daughter, you stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone, if you be not deathless. For living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him. She gave him pause. In that moment, the Witch King had to worry. He was aware of the prophecy. It had somehow gotten back to him, and he had to worry about the possibility that he had misinterpreted this. He had been under the impression, no man may hinder me, as in no mortal, but now he's thinking, well, what if it meant the gender? What if a woman can hurt me? And this hesitation gave Merry the chance to strike from behind. And that action by Merry gave Éowyn the opportunity to strike, and that finished off the Witch King. So he was finished off by Éowyn, who is a man of the race of man, but is not male. And this was all made possible by Merry, who is male, but is not a man. He is a hobbit. My own chosen interpretation is that Glorfindel meant that the race of men will not defeat him alone. The races needed to come together. It's a common theme that you see throughout Tolkien's work. I was going to say the Lord of the Rings, but Tolkien's work in general. If Merry was not there, Éowyn would have just died. And if she was not there, Merry would have died. It had to be the both of them, and it had to be in that he was killed by fellowship, because Merry did not even know that he was with Éowyn. He thought he was with some random soldier named Durnhelm. But he could not leave Éowyn to face her alone. He had to help. It was the friendship, and he was able to overcome the aura of fear that the Witch King gives off. So basically, he was defeated by the races coming together. One person who is a man but is not male, and one person who is male but is not a man. So sort of covered from both sides of however you interpret this. Now, I believe that a bit of this was inspired, actually, I mentioned Shakespeare. It was inspired by Shakespeare. In Macbeth, there was sort of like one of the many Shakespearean prophecies of no man born of woman may kill him, right? And Tolkien thought, well, certainly it would be a woman then. But it actually turned out to be a loophole because the person was born by cesarean section. So Tolkien is sort of playing both, because it's Merry and Éowyn together. It's not one or the other. Okay. Next question. How many different types of hobbits are there, and what was their origin? From an ancestral standpoint, there were 3 types of hobbits. The 3 ancestral races of the hobbits, or kinds of hobbits, were the Stors, the Fallowhides, and the Harfoots. Now, the Stors were the ones that were the most like men. They averaged about half the height of a man, hence the term halfling, which means half man. They are the only hobbits who can grow facial hair, and they're the ones that are most likely to wear shoes or boots. Fallowhides are a little bit taller than the Stors, but they're not as stocky. They have smaller hands and feet, and they tend to be thin. Harfoots are the smallest, and they tend to have brown skin. The hobbits all eventually intermarried with each other. They intermingled, and it became sort of a homogeneous race. Though you still see some hobbits with traits of Stors or traits of Fallowhides. Most of them appear as Harfoots, actually, because I guess they were the most numerous, so their traits got basically applied to all hobbits. The term hobbit, which means hole dweller, actually was originally given to the Harfoots because they had a penchant for digging holes to live in. As to the origin of hobbits, it is a mystery. They are a relation to and likely an offshoot of the race of men. They are mortal, though they have a longer lifespan, with low men of Middle-earth in Tolkien's world living about 70 years and hobbits living about 100 years. They did not appear in any of the written histories of Middle-earth until the Third Age, but according to the hobbits, they had been around before that, so they likely were around in the Second Age. It's just that they weren't in any of the histories. They used to be nomadic tribes that moved all over Middle-earth until they finally started making permanent settlements in Arthedain. Okay. All right, next question. Let's see. This one's also anonymous. Why didn't Saruman make rings of power for himself or other orcs before the Lord of the Rings took place? Saruman did make a ring for himself, but it didn't seem to do much for him. When Gandalf came to Saruman for counsel at the behest of Radagast, he noticed a few changes, and not just in the wizard's demeanor. Gandalf noticed that Saruman was wearing a ring, and that his robes only appeared white at first glance, but shimmered with many colors as he moved. Saruman called himself Saruman of Many Colors at this point, but also called himself Saruman Ringmaker. Now, this was not a ring of power in the sense of what we understand a ring of power to be. It was not made by the elves. It was not made with Sauron's magic. But it was Saruman's own feeble attempt to create a magic ring. Other than making his robes shimmer with a rainbow prism of colors, it didn't seem to really have a function other than perhaps his attempt at fascinating and intimidating Gandalf, and that didn't work. Gandalf simply stated he preferred the white robes. Gandalf got the last word, as when he finally cast Saruman out of the Order and broke his staff, he declared that Saruman had no color now. Saruman's creation of a ring, it seems like kind of a useless gesture, but in knowing his mind, we can understand why he attempted it. He was jealous that Gandalf was gifted a ring of power by the elf Círdan, while he, who was the head of the Order, received no such gift. Gandalf's ring was a great secret, supposedly known only to himself and to Círdan. Tolkien did state, though, that Saruman deduced what had become of Narya, and that it fed his jealousy and his hatred of Gandalf. Either way, Saruman's ring was not very useful to him. He did not have the skill to make rings of power. He was not on the level of Celebrimbor or Sauron. He could not create rings that would help him power-wise or help his minions. So, yeah. One second, I have to reply to a comment. Okay, sorry. Okay, next question. This is also an anonymous one. Who is Boromir's mother? You never really hear much about her. Boromir's mother was a woman named Finduilas. Finduilas was the wife of Denethor II. She was a lot younger than him, by 20 years, actually, even considering that they were both Dunedain. When they married, he was 46, she was 26. Like many of the men of Gondor, and I say men as in the race, Finduilas was named after an elf. The original Finduilas was an elvish princess who was slain by orcs in a pretty gruesome fashion. They put a spear through her and basically nailed her to a tree. Finduilas, the one that is Boromir's mother, she died young. She died at the age of 38. It was said that her health was very poor and that the shadow of Mordor and her longing for her home in Dol Amroth contributed to her poor health, and she passed away from some sort of sickness. We don't know the exact nature of that. Okay, next question. Did Melkor know of his nickname Morgoth, which means Black Foe? Yes, he did. It was Feanor that originally gave Melkor the name Morgoth, and the elves called him that forevermore after that. They would not say his real name. They only would call him Morgoth. Melkor was not present when Feanor made this proclamation, but it is possible that shortly before Feanor died, he cursed Morgoth's name 3 times, and Morgoth might have heard that. However, any doubt as to whether or not he knew the name he was being called is dashed away when Hurin called him not only Morgoth, but a thrall, right to his face in this passage from the book The Children of Hurin. "This last then I will say to you, thrall Morgoth," said Hurin, "and it comes not from the lore of the Eldar, but is put up into my heart in this hour. You are not the lord of men, and you shall not be, though all Arda and Meril fall in your dominion. Beyond the circles of the world, you shall not pursue those who refuse you." Morgoth tried to get the secrets of Gondolin from Hurin, and Hurin refused him, and so Morgoth tried to shatter Hurin's faith. Hurin persevered. He called him a thrall, and he called him Morgoth right to his face, even as he proclaimed himself to be Melkor the Elder King. Hurin was like, no, there's one Elder King, and it's Manwë. Of course, Hurin's big mouth got his entire family cursed, and he had to sit in a chair on the slopes of Thangorodrim and watch his children's lives tear apart for the next 28 years, so this deed certainly did not go unpunished. Okay. Next question: did Tolkien ever describe how Sauron looked without his helmet? Tolkien never described Sauron as wearing a helmet at all. Actually, Sauron was a shapeshifter, and he could look like anything. Usually, he was in fair form, which means that he appeared beautiful. His forms were not all human, though. He could be a wolf, he could be a vampire, he could be, what they say, naked, in his own naked spirit form, which would mean he was invisible. He could be a serpent, he could be any sort of things. After the world was remade in the Akalabeth, Sauron lost his ability to appear in fair form. He could no longer appear beautiful, but he could still appear terrible. Gollum described him as being blackened, with burning hands, one of which was missing a finger, the finger that Isildur cut off from him. Okay, next question. Who is Legolas's grandfather? Legolas's grandfather was named Oropher, at least his paternal grandfather, the one we know about. Oropher lived in Doriath, where he was considered what they called Lathrim, which translates as people of the fence. It's sort of high nobility in Doriath. He survived the sack of Doriath, and after the region of Beleriand sank into the sea, he decided to stay in Middle-earth. And so he moved east to Greenwood the Great, and he established his realm there. His original capital was on this hill called Aemon Blanc, and they had and that's where Dol Guldur was built. Though he took his people north when there were other elves that were moving into the area, nearby Lothlorien, and the dwarves of Moria were there, and he was just like, this is starting to be a bad neighborhood. Let's get out of here. So Oropher, he marched out to war with Sauron with a host of elves, and he died in Mordor along with most of his forces. The few that were left were led back home by his son, Thranduil, who became the king of Greenwood after that. Okay. Next question, and this is a good one. This came from Christian Conkler, who said, who was the necromancer supposed to be in The Hobbit prior to Tolkien writing The Lord of the Rings? So, the necromancer was sort of one part sequel bait and the other part a plot device. Sauron was called at this point the necromancer, was mentioned 3 times during The Hobbit. The first time was to explain how Gandalf came to obtain Thror's map and key. That he found Thror's son Thrain, which is Thorin's father, in the dungeons of the necromancer. And the evil and horror of this unseen villain is punctuated by the horrified reactions of the dwarves and their questioning as to why exactly Gandalf was in such an evil place. He was mentioned again when they questioned why they had to travel through Mirkwood. Why couldn't they instead go around Mirkwood? So, Gandalf explained that the northern roundabout path was too long, and it was also plagued by goblins, and the southern path was even longer, and it would take them too close to the necromancer, which caused Thorin to shudder. And keep in mind that Thorin is walking with determination towards Smaug, into danger, towards a dragon, but he wouldn't go anywhere near Sauron the necromancer. It's the last time that the necromancer was mentioned was just Gandalf stating that he had driven the necromancer out of Mirkwood. Now, of course, Sauron was a character at this point. He did exist, but he went through a lot of revisions. The original Sauron was named Tevildo, the Prince of Cats. So Tevildo was an evil-speaking cat who was the pet of Melkor, the main villain. You could see how Melkor was the early version of Melkor, or Morgoth. Tolkien had a dislike of cats. He wasn't a cat person. He once called them in a letter the fauna of Mordor. And in early writings of Beren and Luthien, we can see that there's sort of a dog and cat, good and evil dichotomy in his work. There's the noble Huan and the evil Tevildo. Eventually, Tevildo was replaced in the story in Beren and Luthien with a human necromancer named Thu. And the name Thu eventually became the basis of Gorthuar the Cruel, also known as Sauron the Abhorred. Tolkien was working on a much-requested sequel to The Hobbit, which he was calling The Lord of the Rings, and at this point it was a much smaller tale than what it turned out to be. It was a tale of 6 hobbits, Bingo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Fatty, and Trotter, and revealing that the necromancer that was mentioned a few times in The Hobbit was the titular Lord of the Rings, and he was the creator of Bilbo's magic ring. So as the story of the Lord of the Rings grew more complex, Tolkien continued to also rework his old stories, Beren and Luthien, the Fall of Gondolin, the Children of Hurin, and he was adding to them, and he was revising them, and he's working on the Lord of the Rings. He came up with the idea of what would come to eventually be called the Legendarium, which he at that point called the Saga of the Three Jewels and the Rings of Power. So The Lord of the Rings became not just a sequel to The Hobbit, but it was connected to all of his other stories, Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin, Children of Hurin, and of course the Silmarillion that tied everything together. So the necromancer that was mentioned in The Hobbit became Sauron, who was already a necromancer in the Silmarillion. Bingo became Frodo, Trotter became a man, and they changed his name to Strider. Fatty was given a less important role, and the entire story opened up to a much grander fashion. But the original idea was this is a villain that we're going to use as a plot device to answer these questions as to where did the map and key come from, why can't they go around Mirkwood, and also sort of a sequel bait. We drove him out of Mirkwood, but he's the Lord of the Rings, you know. Okay, next question. Why is this one so zoomed out? Let's zoom that in. Okay, so this question came from... Oh, I swear this had a name on it. Where's the name on this one? This was not an anonymous one. Give me one moment here, and I'll tell you. I know for a fact that I had a name on this one. But I can't find... Oh, I'm sorry, but it's a rather long question. So here it is. Sam usually comes off as being so honest and straightforward that he doesn't seem remotely capable of subterfuge. At the same time, when Frodo arrives at Crickhollow, Merry reveals that Sam was the one primarily responsible for gathering the information for Merry about what Frodo was up to, at least until Gandalf caught him. Frodo also realizes that Sam was only... It's kind of cut off. Oh, here we are. Sam was only pretending to sleep while Frodo spoke with Gildor. It's a very long question. Does this suggest that Sam managed to deceive Gandalf to some extent when he claimed that he had overheard things he didn't understand? So here's the thing. Sam is good, but he's not perfect. He's generally honest. He's humble. He's a good person. Tolkien called him the chief hero of the story and greater than himself. However, he is not a paragon of pure virtue. Tolkien did not write his heroes as being perfect. Not even the Valar were perfect. Sam, of course, was sneaky and deceptive as he worked with Merry, Pippin, and Fatty as conspirators to get information about Frodo and the One Ring. He did all the things that you mentioned. He snuck around, he dropped some eaves, he pretended to sleep when listening in on a conversation between Frodo and Gildor. But so what? He isn't perfect. None of Tolkien's characters are perfect. Now, Tolkien might cry foul and say, well, Iluvatar is perfect, but I'd say that, well, Iluvatar is just a stand-in for God, the God of Abraham. So that's not really a Tolkien character. So I believe he'd have to agree with me on that. But to answer the chief question, did he actually deceive Gandalf? No, of course he didn't. Gandalf asked him what he heard, and Sam was very afraid. He knew better than to lie in this situation. He was afraid that Gandalf might turn him into something unnatural. So he told the truth. He said what he heard, and he admitted that he did not understand it all. This was the truth. Sam was planning on reporting all this to Merry, but that doesn't mean that he knew what it all meant. Okay, next question. After Sauron's defeat in the Third Age, were the Palantiri safe to use? Yeah, they were safe. The Ithil Stone was no longer held by Sauron, and that was the danger. The only real danger of using the Palantiri was that Sauron had the Ithil Stone. It was likely still there. It probably wasn't destroyed. It may have been destroyed, though. The stones are not evil. They were made by the elves, and Gandalf even says that it may have been Feanor that made them. The issue was that many of them became lost or unusable over the years, and some bad assumptions were made about the Ithil Stone. The Ithil Stone was believed to have been destroyed in the fall of Minas Ithil. However, this was not true. Sauron got his hands on it. And when the likes of Denethor and Saruman peered into their stones, they found themselves conversing with the Dark Lord. The Ithil stone may have been destroyed when Barad-dûr fell, or it might be lying under the rubble perfectly fine. Just as some of the other stones that were lost, they are probably perfectly fine, they just happen to be underwater. The two usable stones were both held by Aragorn in the Fourth Age. The Anor stone, though, was so damaged that only seers of great power could see anything in it other than Denethor's burning hands. The Orthanc stone, though, was used by Aragorn to survey his kingdom to no ill effect. So they were his by right, after all, because even though the elves created them, they were given to the kings of Númenor, so they belonged to Aragorn. Okay. Next question. This one came in from Elizabeth McDougall. Why was the name of Lothlorien changed from Laurellindorenan? It wasn't so much changed, but Lothlorien is a mishmash of two different languages. Lothlorien is derived from the Quenya word Lorien, which means dreamland, which is the name of a realm in the Undying Lands, and oftentimes it's also the common name given to one of the Valar, Irmo. Irmo is usually called Lorien after his realm, just as another one of the Valar, Namo, is often called Mandos because that's his realm. Loth, however, is Sindarin. It's not Quenya, it's Sindarin, and it means blossom. So Lothlorien is a mishmash of two Elvish languages to mean dreamland of the blossom. Treebeard simplifies this when he translates it as dream flower. Laurellindorenan, on the other hand, is a Quenya word, and it is derived from Lore, which means golden, Lindo, which refers usually to a songbird, and Renan, which means voice. So the basic translation is golden song. The more poetic application is the Valley of Singing Gold. In Quenya, it was also called Loranande, which means Valley of Gold, which you could also say in Sindarin as Nan Laur or Glorman. The mishmash of two different languages, it seems strange, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you consider the realm of Lothlorien. You have a Noldor queen, you have a Sindar or possibly Falmari, although I believe he's Sindar king, and then the subjects are Sylvan, so it makes sense that both Quenya and Sindarin would be used in the name. Okay. Here's the one from the thumbnail, and this was requested by Brendan Lane, who asks, when the resurrected Gandalf the White says, "I've wandered far on roads I will not tell," what does he mean? Basically, he's saying that he died, and that he's not telling you what happens after you die. He's not telling you about the afterlife. I'm going to go into some detail here. It seems fairly a common misconception that upon bodily death, Gandalf passed to the west, and he was sent back by the Valar. It seems, however, that in being incarnated in a mortal body, for the Istari did age, though slowly, Gandalf may have shared the doom of man, meaning that he passed fully from the world. Now, it isn't as cut and dry as that. If Gandalf's body had a natural lifespan, we don't know of it. And certainly the observations of Círdan upon the arrival of the wizards peg Gandalf as being the oldest in appearance. He already had gray hair compared to, say, the raven black hair of Saruman, and he was leaning on his staff. Círdan called Gandalf the Grey Messenger, and he gave him the Red Ring to give him aid and comfort in the burden that he has taken upon himself. Now, in my surmise, I would say that Círdan recognized immediately the Istari as agents of Manwë taken flesh, and that Gandalf was older and more wizened by choice, and that he would need the Red Ring to assist him in his endeavor. By the end of the Third Age, by the observation of Gimli, Saruman and Gandalf appear to be the same age. So Saruman has caught up with him in terms of aging, while the preserving effects of the Red Ring have either slowed down or perhaps even halted Gandalf's aging, making him remain much the same. Now, you might wonder, where am I going with this? What does this have to do with Gandalf's resurrection? Well, when mortals die, they pass fully from the world. They stand before God, who is called Ilúvatar, and they walk an unknown and unseen path beyond that is not known to the elves or even to the Ainur, which would include Gandalf. However, this happens at the end of what is known as their allotted time, their natural lifespan. If they're killed early, they may reside in Mandos for a time before passing from the world, which is how the likes of Beren wound up in Mandos and was able to be resurrected by Namo. So this being said, we can state that Gandalf is something of a special case. There's unique circumstances here in the way that things normally work, if there even is a way that things normally work for beings such as Gandalf. He is neither mortal nor immortal, but he's an angel bound to a physical body. So what happens when that body is slain? It is possible that there was no special rule for this happenstance, that it was unanticipated by the Valar. Surely when Saruman died, it was very different. His spirit rose from his body and looked to the west and was blown away by a cold breeze, which we can strongly surmise as the rejection of Manwë, the Lord of the Breath of Arda. Saruman's spirit will remain in Middle-earth. But when Gandalf dies, however, he does not pass to the west. He does not stay in Middle-earth. His spirit passes out of Arda, plucked out of the world by Ilúvatar, much as a mortal is. It is said that death is a gift given to Ilúvatar by man, that the elves will in time come to envy this gift, and even after a time the Valar will wish that they could depart from the world as well. No one but Ilúvatar, no one but God knows where mortals go when they die, until Gandalf died. Gandalf died, he passed from the world, and he was sent back by Ilúvatar with greater still power and authority. He was still an incarnate, because he was sent back to the same body, still clutching his sword, still had his ring, but he had new powers. He had reality-altering power that was unseen in Middle-earth since before the Spring of Arda, and also in the War of the Valar, actually. So Gandalf not only comes back empowered and with greater authority, but now he knows what happens when mortals die, and he's not going to tell you. That's what that line meant. Okay, next question. This one came in from Sean MCM, who asked, what happened? And this is actually, I'm glad I had this one here because this is somewhat related to the previous question. What happened to the slain Balrogs? Since they were Ainur, did they go back to be judged, or were they cast out of the void? So this is a really good question, by which I mean that we don't know. I don't know. Tolkien was very non-specific about this. The Balrogs were indeed Maiar spirits who joined with Melkor, but what happens when they die? This depends on whether or not you consider the Balrogs to be incarnates. Though we never hear of Balrogs shedding their raiment and going in their naked spirit forms, we do have indications that they can change their shape, however vague it is. They can change the amount of flame or shadow that they output, and Gandalf mentioned that when submerged in water, Durensbane, the Balrog that he fought, became a thing of slime. He may have just been poetically saying that it was slimy, though. If they are indeed incarnated, there's not even any hard and fast rules as to what happens when they die. Gandalf passed from the world and was sent back by Ilúvatar. Saruman did not pass from the world, and his spirit rose from his body, looked to the west, was denied, passed away on a cold wind. None of the Balrogs that were slain were ever said to return, so it is possible that when an incarnate Maya dies, what happens is basically at the will of Ilúvatar, in which case I would surmise that they are probably removed from the world fully, as Gandalf was, just not sent back. If they are not incarnate, one questions how they were even killed at all, especially by the likes of Ecthelion drowning one, or being stabbed in the torso by Glorfindel. These deaths, these types of deaths, point very strongly to the fact that the Balrogs are incarnates, and when they die, they were probably just removed from the world. Okay, next question. This one came in anonymously. Did any of the hobbits ever ride on a horse in the Lord of the Rings trilogy? If so, who was it that rode on a horse? So usually, because hobbits are so small, they usually don't ride horses. They usually ride ponies. But there were 3 instances in which hobbits rode on horses, and it was Frodo, Merry, and Pippin. So Frodo is the only one that rode on a horse without any assistance. He rode on a horse alone, and the horse's name was Asphodel. That was Glorfindel's horse, which he used to escape the Black Riders at the end of Book 1. Frodo did not really heed Glorfindel's warning to just flee, but he attempted to stand his ground, invoking Elbereth, which is Varda. And this worked out, though, because Glorfindel was able to box the wraiths into the ford of Bruinen, and that allowed Elrond, and with the help of Gandalf, to wash them away. Pippin rode on Shadowfax, along with Gandalf, and Merry rode on a horse whose name was Winfola, and that was along with Durnhelm, who, of course, that was Eowyn in disguise, on the way from Rohan to Gondor. Okay, next question. Okay. This one came in from Eric Hildreth. Did Gandalf become Olorin again after sailing west? If so, would it change the dynamic with others of the Fellowship? That's an interesting question. Or an interesting theory, I should say, once we get past some misconceptions. Gandalf was always Olorin. This was his true name. Though he was incarnated as an old man, he was still, at this point, Olorin. He just kept his identity secret, for the most part. Not that it really would have mattered much. He took the names that were given to him, Gandalf, Greyhain, Incarnas, Mithrandir, Tharkun, but he was still Olorin. Gandalf's true name was mentioned directly by Faramir, of all people. Faramir was one of his chief pupils, and he told him directly that he was from the West with a capital W, so he did actually reveal his true nature to Faramir. However, I did mention that it wouldn't matter much, right? Olorin was not really a well-known Maya. And this was noted in the Silmarillion. I'm going to read you the relevant passage from the Silmarillion. Wisest of the Maiar was Olorin. He too dwelt in Lorien, but his ways took him often to the house of Nienna, and of her he learned pity and patience. Of Melian much is told in the Quenta Silmarillion, but of Olorin that tale does not speak. For though he loved the elves, he walked among them unseen or in form as one of them, and they did not know whence came the fair visions or the promptings of wisdom that he put into their hearts. In later days, he was the friend to all the children of Iluvatar, and took pity on their sorrows, and those who listened to him awoke from their despair and put away the imaginations of darkness. So, getting to the more direct point, I think the theory of the question is, does Gandalf shed his incarnate form, the old man form, appearing in a normal guise, or does he continue to use the form of the older man? We can't know. Nothing of the doings in the Undying Lands after the Lord of the Rings is known, but I can give you my opinions, based solely on my study of the text and the characters. I believe that Gandalf would stay as he was, and he would happily answer to the name Gandalf. He did note that he loved that name. It was his favorite name. Or Mithrandir, as the case may be. At least while his mortal friends were still there in Arda. Bilbo, Frodo, and Gimli would eventually pass away and go beyond the confines of the world, though Legolas would persist. Would Gandalf at this point shed his form and go invisible again? I have come to believe that Olorin's main character trait was that he somewhat lacked confidence in himself. He was certainly brave, but he did not always believe in himself. We see this demonstrated at several points in The Lord of the Rings, but even more earlier, when asked to go to Middle-earth, he states that he feels inadequate, and Manwë tells him that's why you have to go. Gandalf has been through a lot, and he has come back even more wise, and he was already, as the passage that I read mentioned, he was already considered the wisest of all the Maiar. So the wisdom of Gandalf at this point would probably approach that of the Valar. And he has gained confidence without pride, without arrogance. I believe that though he may shed his incarnate form, he will no longer walk among the elves unseen or in disguise. He will make himself a fair raiment and be known for what he is. And that's how Legolas would come to know him. But I think for his mortal friends, he would keep the old man. I think it would be comforting to them. Anyway, final question. And this one came in from David Eaton, who asks, how does the encounter with Gollum go in the original publication of The Hobbit as opposed to the revised edition? Okay, I like this question. I don't get to talk about this that often. The encounter in the first edition reflects the lie that Bilbo told to Gandalf and the dwarves later on, rather than the truth, which is told in the revised edition. Now, interestingly enough, Bilbo's false account was put into the Red Book, which Tolkien supposedly based everything on. However, this was specifically the Red Book of Westmarch. This specific version of the Red Book may have had the truth written in it. It may have been revised by Frodo or revised by Samwise or one of their descendants. Frodo mentioned in The Lord of the Rings that he prefers the truth over Bilbo's lie, and he wonders why would Bilbo even bother to lie at all. And of course, we know why, because of the One Ring and its influence, but the question asks, what exactly is that lie? How did the story go in that original printing of The Hobbit? So the chapter starts off much the same. Bilbo was knocked unconscious. He comes to, he gropes around for his things, he finds the ring, and he doesn't know what it is. He just puts it in his pocket. He draws his sword, which was not yet named Sting because he had not yet been to Mirkwood, and he sees that it is glowing, but faintly, so the goblins are around, but they're not close by. He stumbles into Gollum's lake, and he meets him, and this is where the stories diverge. In the revised edition, the version that we're all familiar with, there's the riddle game, and the riddle game's prize, if Gollum wins, is to kill and eat Bilbo, but if Bilbo wins, Gollum will show him the way out. In the first edition, it's a bit different. Gollum does not offer to show Bilbo out of the caves, but instead offers a prize, a vague prize that is non-specific. The riddle game itself goes the same. Bilbo wins by the same strange means as the revised edition. Gollum, however, does not go ballistic. He doesn't scream and curse and demand to know what's in Bilbo's pocket, nor does he go to retrieve the ring for the purposes of disappearing and killing Bilbo. Rather, he goes to retrieve the ring to give it to Bilbo, because that was going to be the prize. Bilbo had already found the ring, so Gollum can't find it, of course, and he, instead of flying into a rage because his birthday present, his precious, is missing, he apologizes to Bilbo and says, I'm sorry, I lost it. And then it's actually Bilbo's idea, well, why don't you show me the way out? So Gollum guides Bilbo out. Bilbo does try on the ring at one point, and this is how he comes to realize that it makes him invisible, because Gollum loses sight of him while he's wearing it. But he takes it off, and they part at the exact spot where in the revised edition where Gollum was sitting and Bilbo jumped over him while wearing the ring. So Gollum is still somewhat sinister because he wants to kill Bilbo and eat him, but he's a lot less sinister. He attempts to honor his end of the bargain. He does not break the sacrosanct rules of the riddle game. Tolkien changed this when he was writing the sequel, The Lord of the Rings, because he was going to portray the One Ring as being pure evil. And it was seductive, and it was not something that you would give away. You would not do that, especially not somebody like Gollum. And of course, Gollum would be far more wretched, and he would be very suspicious, so that's why those changes were made, to be more in continuity with The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, guys, if you've gotten all the way through this, we're in 48 minutes here. You must have liked the video. So why don't you hit like? Do me a favor here. Hit the like button. Leave me some comments, right? Subscribe if you haven't. Make sure you go through all the hoops that they make you go through to subscribe. It used to be, back in the day, you just hit subscribe and boom, you were notified of all videos that come out. Now you have to hit a bell and you have to turn on notifications. You guys know how to do that. I'm not Watch Mojo. I'm not going to patronize you and tell you how to do it, but I'm just going to ask that you do it. Send me some questions on Quora as well. I will see you guys next week.